Hey everyone, welcome to Data Umbrella's webinar. I'm going to do a brief introduction and then open up the presentation for Mark, and we'll have Q&A at the end. If you have any questions, put them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. This is being recorded, so if you have to leave early or so, you can watch it later as well, or if you join late. Data Umbrella, if you're unfamiliar, we're a community for underrepresented persons in data science, and we are a nonprofit organization. This is the team that makes it happen behind the scenes. My name is Reshma. Beryl is out of Kenya. Christina is out of New York. And Sangam is out of India. We have a code of conduct, and we thank you for helping to make this a professional, friendly, welcoming community for all. There are various ways to support Data Umbrella. The first and foremost is to contribute to making it a welcoming community. If you could share Data Umbrella events with others that you think might be interested in our topics, that would be great. We also have a bunch of projects on our GitHub repo for video timestamps. Our website is, the code is publicly there if you see an error and want to contribute. We have a blog and a data events board as well. We have a nonprofit donation link, which is actually not working because we had to change our fiscal sponsor. So I'll share that later. If you want to subscribe to our YouTube channel, we have a really great library of topics in data science, Python, RStats, open source. One of our playlists is career advice. Other playlists include data visualization, contributing to open source, various libraries in the computational Python ecosystem, scikit-learn, PyMC series, and NumPy are just some of the other ones. We have a monthly newsletter. It's at dataumbrella.substack.com. If you'd like to sign up for it, I'll share the link in a bit. These are our most widely used social media platforms. So whatever your preference is, you can follow us on the one that you prefer. We have live captioning on this platform. At the top, it says CC for closed captioning. So if you want live transcription, you can click on that to help you follow the event if you wish. I'll share a link for online suggestion box. So if you have any suggestions for future event topics, let us know. If you have feedback on this event or any technical issues, please let us know. And if you have any other feedback, for example, if you're interested in giving a talk or you know of someone in your network that you'd like to give a talk, let us know. Our next event is in July, which is going to be visualizing energy transitions, and that's going to be quite interesting. Today's talk is Build Your First Database Web App with Tiki Trackers. This is going to be really interesting because Tiki is very powerful. It's been around for a long time, and we get to introduce our community to it. Our speaker is Marc Laporte. Marc is a social entrepreneur with a focus on free, Libre, open source software, wikis, collaboration, information governance, and organizational performance. Marc is the founder of WikiSuite.org and the CEO of evoludata.com. You can find him on LinkedIn, on X, or on GitHub. And with that, I am handing over the microphone and screen share over to Marc.
Super. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, super. All right. So nice to meet you, everybody. Thanks for attending, and thank you for the introduction. So I'm going to give a quick presentation more in a slideshow mode, and after I'm going to go right into a demo where we can play with the tool and you can see how it works, how you can build your first app. So Tiki Trackers, and so this is the timeline. So who am I? What are Tiki Trackers? What's the demo? And we're going to have all the questions at the end. But I suggest if you have questions during the presentation, just put them in the chat room, and some of them I may answer right away, and otherwise we'll have them at the end. So who am I? So I am a social entrepreneur. Basically, I started over 20 years ago, now near to 25 years ago. I was working in e-commerce, and I was involved in a bunch of nonprofit organizations, and we needed tools to help people collaborate. And tools were sometimes not appropriate, too expensive. There was a cost per user, and because we were nonprofits, we needed to have something that would be not too expensive, ideally free. And that's how I discovered open source. And I thought it was really great that once you deploy a system, you don't have an incremental cost for each new person that participates. And that's very important in a nonprofit, because you want to have as many volunteers as possible. And you don't want to have at one point the situation where you have some volunteers that have access to the collaboration system and some that don't, because you don't have enough money. So I've been doing this for 25 years, and I've learned a lot, and I'm glad I'm still learning, and I'm glad to share with you what I've discovered. So one of the cool things that I've discovered in my journey is called Tiki Trackers. So basically, the context of that is I was helping a group to manage their knowledge, and that's what I was looking for, a wiki. So I needed a way for people to put information on the wiki that would be for when there's a meeting, for all the meeting minutes, the agenda, and everything that we were doing, all the policies and the processes. And I discovered that in the tool called Tiki Wiki, and that was awesome. But then there was another tool in Tiki that I also discovered called Tiki Trackers, which is basically a way to create a database, forms, reports. And I, excuse me, get the water. So in this case, it was and the first application I built was an event, basically to organize. It was like a CRM, content relationship, customer relationship management, was basically to contact members of the association to invite them to an event. And we had a bunch of volunteers that needed to call the people and say, how are you coming and all that. But we couldn't have just, we all needed to know who else had already phoned someone, and etc. So I built that with Tiki Trackers, and I was really happy that it was quite easy to do. So trackers, think of them as a lot of people use spreadsheets to track data, but spreadsheets are not really a database. They can be used as a database, but that's not really what they do. So Tiki Trackers is when you need a real database in which you create your fields to be specific to what you need. Now, one thing that's important is Tiki Trackers is one of the features of Tiki. And then Tiki is 100% open source. There's no open core model. There's no proprietary plugins. Everything's open source. And it's managed by an open source, a nonprofit, which is the Tiki Association. However, there is a business ecosystem. There are businesses offering consulting, but you don't need that. You can use everything as open source. It's just that some businesses prefer to hire other businesses to help them, but otherwise you don't need it. You just download it and you use it. So this is for high level for Tiki Trackers. So at a high level, step one is to create the tracker. Think of it, if you were thinking in terms of a spreadsheet, it would be to create the spreadsheet. Fields would be, so you create your fields. What am I trying to track? Then you submit the data, and then you can view the list and then do the stuff. So I'm gonna show it for real, but this is just at a high level. Now, what else does it do? So beyond the forms, you can also have super powerful searching and sorting, because all the data is tracked in what we call unified index. So it can track really huge amounts of data, and you can sort them and do all kinds of things in a very powerful way. The other thing is that because it's a the full name of Tiki is Tiki Wiki CMS Groupware, it's also a full groupware. So everything related to users, permissions, groups is super powerful. So you can specifically say which data is visible by which group, who can edit, who can view, you can configure that. And the last part is highly configurable, because this is a solution that has been built by a community for over 20 years with over 400 people that have contributed source code, some of which were working in companies and they were sharing that source code. So you have a lot of collective intelligence of people adding information, adding knowledge, adding tools, and all that in one nice package. Some of the other things you can do, because there's the trackers, which are a database, but there's also a calendar feature. You can combine those things and combine it to work on scheduling. You can import, export the data. You also have automations and statistics. So, but everything is browser-based. So you don't need to download anything, just a browser, and you do everything there. Some examples of what people can do with it. So some people use it for project management, so some for a CRM, some use it to manage their human resources, because if you've seen how a typical HR department works in an organization, you know they use a lot of spreadsheets. Well, instead of all those spreadsheets, which are difficult to work with, it could be a database, in this case, Tiki Trackers. And also, we also manage files, so some people use it as an electronic document management system, and many other things. Now, just to give you sort of the big picture, because you're going to hear things like, okay, I'm going to talk about Tiki, I'm going to talk about WikiSuite, so what's all that? So this is sort of my vision on how you organize the data in an organization, how you organize information. So this is based on a pyramid, like sort of you go with the base level. So at the bottom, what you need policies and procedures and the knowledge base. If in an organization, people don't know how things are supposed to work, it's going to be really difficult. So the first thing you need to solve is to have your knowledge organized. And a wiki is really good at that. So you start with the wiki. Then the wiki is sort of passive. It's like, okay, if I need to know something, I know I need to know something, so I go and check in the wiki. And if it's incorrect, I improve it. But then the next part is if you need to train people to do specific things, then you want e-learning. Then once you have that, you may want to have, okay, what does your organization do? It does stuff, so it probably has to make proposals or contracts. So those can be done in wiki pages, and those can be worked in teams, and then you can work on those and make them better. And instead of having like files in desktop applications, you have a web tool so everybody can collaborate. You have version history and permissions. Next step is you want all your data, that's structured data, instead of having it in spreadsheets, you want it in databases. In this case, Tiki Trackers. And also, if you have a big organization, you want typically for people in different parts of organizations to know each other and to know what they do, so that there can be collaboration. And then you get really in the higher part where you're closer to collective intelligence, reports and BI, and then alerts and exceptions. Basically, you don't want the system to sort of send you reports for everything that happens. You want the system to send you an alert if something is wrong. And at the top is AI, right? But AI, and we're not there yet, to tell you. In WikiSuite, we're not there yet. But the thing is, you need all your data to have good AI. If you don't control your data, you're not going to be able to do the more advanced things. So, of course, my point of view is that to control your data, you need to have it open source. And if it's not open source and it's not under your control, well, you're not going to be able to leverage it properly. So WikiSuite is the federation of open source projects that do all this, and Tiki is one part of that, and Tiki Trackers is one component of that. So that was just to give you a high level. So now we're going to jump into the demo, where I'm going to show you in real life what does that mean. So I'm going to quit here. So everything I just showed you right now, that was actually a slideshow that was in a wiki page in Tiki. So you see, this is Tiki here, and this is the slideshow. So what I just showed you, it's essentially a wiki page that can be collaborated on. So we don't want to use desktop apps and then file formats. We do everything online. So now I'm going to show you the end result. I'm logged in as the admin, so I'm going to log out as the admin. I'm going to log in as the basic user. So I'm just going to grab my password here, the basic user. There we go. And I log in. So what does it look like for the basic user in a system? So this is a database building tool, so we can build any database. So I picked basically a simple one, which is a to-do list, because everybody can relate to that, but it could be anything, right? So, but this is basically a to-do. So you see here and so here's a slideshow, and here's an example. Okay, so this is the page for my tasks. So imagine the end user, he has or she has some tasks. So here we go. So we have a bunch of tasks. And then to see the task, you just click here, and you have the information about the task. And then you could, for example, add a comment. So I say, I started on this, for example. There you go. And then the cool thing here, if I open up my right section here, you see everything that happens since my last visit is tracked here. So every time I log in, I can go there. I can go directly to tasks, or I can see what happened here. I'm just going to hide this for now, just so we have a bit more place. So that's the simple sort of my task dashboard. You could also look at the tasks in a simple list because it is a database. And now if you see, okay, you see here are a bunch of tasks. These are just dummy tasks that are in the system. I see all this. And I could go to one, for example, and see, okay, I see the task. And if I edit it, so you see here, it's basically a traditional a database, right? So you have your status, you open, pending, closed. You could change the priority, what's the status, and the description, and you can assign it. What we typically do is we say, okay, a task can be assigned to someone, and it's assigned by someone, and there's also other people that are kept informed. So everybody would receive emails if things change. And here, there's some emails. I'm going to show you that later. Okay, so that's my simple task system. And I can also look at the point of view. I say, okay, well, show me all the tasks, not just my tasks, but tasks that are perhaps assigned to other people. And here I could see, so I could see what's happening. Now I'm going to show you something that's really cool. Is so if we go back to the simple list, and we go, I'm going to sort this, and I'm going to go and see this task specifically. This task has what you would expect, right? So fields, but you see it also has emails. So I have emails. So when I receive an email, I can actually move it to the database. And if I respond to the email, it's actually going to be here. So this is quite cool because often what happens is if you have like a shared mailbox, it's a bit of a mess because you don't really know who answered, what happened. And if you receive an email and you say this other person needs access to it, you're going to forward to someone else. And then this person is going to forward it to someone else. And it's going to be like, it's going to be a festival of forward to all, forward to all, forward to all. And then for one simple discussion, you may end up with hundreds of emails because you have a copy that if the email is sent to 10 people, well, then there's 10 people have that email. So it's a lot of data. It's very inefficient. So when we receive an email with a system like this, we move it here, then it's visible to all the people that should see the task. And it's nicely, cleanly self-contained. So I'll show you a bit what that looks like because we have a webmail which is integrated. So remember I told you, so Tiki, the full name is Tiki Wiki CMS Groupware. So it has the wiki, it has the tracker, but also has groupware features, which are, for example, to manage email. So here's my mailbox, for example, and this is just a test account, but I could take these emails, for example, and I could say these ones are unread. I could go to this one, for example, and delete it. So there's all the features you would expect from a webmail. And suppose I could compose a new email directly from the interface. So this would be a standard email that I would just be sending out. And if I have multiple accounts connected, I could say from which account I'm sending it. For here, we just have one, but I could configure multiple ones. And you see here from the email, here we have just one that's configured, but I can have multiple ones. And if I click here on everything, it's going to aggregate all the emails from all different accounts. Similarly, if I come back to my simple list, let's say I want to send an email that's related to one of the tasks. Let's say this one. I could click here, and it's going to compose the email, but it's going to associate it to that task. So then it's going to be, everybody's going to know I sent an email for that. Okay, so that's for emails. And then another cool thing is we have all these tasks. I want to know where, who's working on what's the dashboard essentially. And this is done basically by taking all that data and putting it in a presentation in a wiki page. So this is a pivot table. So here we could see, who's working on it, what they're assigned for. Now, a cool thing is I can edit this. If I click the edit the pivot table, and I'm just going to hide this here to make this a bit nicer. This is a tool that some of you maybe have seen. It's called Pivot Table JS. It's an open source tool for pivot tables that we've integrated in Tiki. So basically, we just give all the data to the pivot table, and then it lets us build our own reports. So you see, this is the same data, but I have different ways of presenting it. So it's all point and click. And as you can see, there's a lot of different types of charts, right? So of course, the data has to make sense for it, because maybe I'll pick one of these. It looks weird now because that data is not appropriate. And then let's say I like this one, bar chart. Then let's say I want to move things around. I could just drag and drop and say, oh, this is what I want. This is the data I want to see, or this is the data. So you can actually change all these values. So usually, if you know what you're doing, you know what you can configure it. If you don't really know what you're doing, you just poke around until it gives you something which is useful to know what's happening with your data. All right. Another thing that's cool is automation. So we have all this data, but sometimes we have specific things. So let's say somebody, in this case, just as an example, somebody leaves the organization and there's a bunch of tasks that are assigned to this person. Well, you want to remove those assignments. So how would you do that? So you could say, for example, I do a search for all the tasks, let's say for basic user. I click filter, and then it would give me a report. And then I could check them all or check some of them, and I could say remove the assignment, for example, remove it. So I won't do it here, but that's basically it. So think about basically any type of automation. It's always the same idea. You do a filter to get all the possible values, then you can select all or select a subset, and then do your actions. And these actions, there's like many actions possible, and it's easy to code. Of course, you need to be a programmer, but if you need more types of actions, those can be added. Next part, just a search. So just a classic search, but quite powerful. And this is going back just to the rest. So the webmail, this is my normal email account with everything you would expect from a traditional webmail. Now, cool thing, so it supports IMAP, and also there's a new standard out there called JMAP. And so this is the stable version. The next version of this supports JMAP, which is a new email standard to make things easier and better. And then this was just an example of the wiki. So we have a bunch of wiki pages. So these are changes we make in the wiki pages, things that you would expect from a normal wiki engine. So that gives you sort of a look of what does it look like from the basic user perspective. Okay, so the basic user has a tool and they can manage their workflows like that. But now, how was that built? Because that's what we're here to do today, is we say, okay, well, how does it work to build a tool like that? And this is really catered for non-programmers. So it's say power users, people that are used to maybe doing advanced things with spreadsheets, and they don't program, but they can make advanced tools, or they know what the workflow needs to be. So I'm going to show you how to build this. So right now you see we have the task tracker, so that's already done. So we're going to just create a bogus new thing just to show you what it is, how that works. So the first thing is we would create that tracker. So now let's see. So now we could do anything. It doesn't need to be a task tracker. So anybody in the chat would have some suggestions of what we would want to build. So maybe a questionnaire, maybe a timesheet tracker, maybe a project tracker. What would your imagination be? Okay, a questionnaire about product features. Super. Perfect. So so let's do that. So let's say what's called a list of products. So here we created the trackers called products, and here we're going to have a bunch of options. And this is very typical over Tiki because it's been built for the last over 20 years. There's tons and tons of options. So that's a bit of a barrier to entry because you need to get familiar with that. But once you do, it's super powerful because everything's there. So these are our options. So there's a lot of things. I told you about permissions that are very powerful. These are the options for permissions. So we can keep it simple. The default product list is fine. So we'll go just products. It's very, very simple. Okay, save that. So now what does the product have, right? Okay, so now we need to add fields. So in the chat, please add examples of fields that you would like in a product database. So I'm just gonna go ahead, but for example, I'll go with product name. So name is going to be a text field, and we could keep the default settings, but we're just going to go and see, just to show you what the settings could be. So I could create my field, so the product name, but there's a bunch of options, right? So the display size, like how big do we want it? Sometimes you want to prepend the value with something or put something at the end, append. Maximum length, you want autocomplete. Like there's tons of things. You may want validation to say, okay, it has to be distinct, for example. You can't have two product names with the same thing. There could be rules that you could apply. So let's just keep it simple for now. We'll say it's just product name. Okay, quantity. So I'll go add field. Quantity will be a numeric field. Quantity. Okay. Dimensions. Okay, that's a good one. So dimensions, that would actually be interesting. If maybe we should create a dimensions field one day, but right for now we don't have a specific field, but we could build one. So what we're going to do, we're going to say the length of the product. So that, let's say, will be numeric. And then we could specify, we'd have to specify, for example, let's say in centimeters, let's say. And then we could say we want the height. Sorry for people that are not in the metric system. And then we would go numeric. Okay, we want a date. So Joel, I see you asked for a date, but what would be the date? So it would be the date that the product was introduced, or the expiry date. We could have both. So let's say date introduced. So we would say, I want a date field. There you go. What else? We have the weight. Okay, so the weight. Okay, that would be numeric. Price, okay. So price, that's good, price. So that would be a currency. What else do we have? That's it, no more ideas. Okay, so let me show you now for these fields. So first of all, now we've just created a database. So now if I create an item, I would have all this information. But that's where you can start tweaking, right? So you could say, yeah, but wait a sec, the date introduced, I have the date. I don't really care about, for example, the time. Well, then you would go to your fields, and then field by field, you would have, okay, date introduced. I don't really want date and time, I just want the date. So you could change that. And then the other cool thing is if you go to the fields, when I said add fields, there are, I'm going to show you the admin panel, there are approximately 50 types of fields, right? So some are, some as you would expect, like the ones you saw, for example, the currency, date and time. But you have fields like also there are more for programmatic things, like an action field, the list of articles, which would be articles that are part of the rest of the system. Now I'm not sure if my screen has frozen, but it doesn't look like you're at the same place as I am. Are you on a list of fields?
I can see add field at top and then name and then type as text field and more types available.
All right, so let me switch over. Yeah, okay, super. Because I switched to a new window. So this is the list of fields that are in trackers. So you have different field types. And you see now we've activated them all to sort of show, not all of them, but many of them for you to show you. But this is the result of over 20 years of people collaborating. So when some fields were missing, people would, somebody would create them and share them with the community. So that's why there's a lot of fields. And one of the cool things, for example, is this one is mathematical calculations. So I won't do it all live because it could take a bit of time. But just as an example, when we were saying, yeah, but we have two fields, and we want to know the dimensions. So we have a three-dimensional object. So we have, you know, length, deepness, and height. How would we get like the volume of that? Well, we could do that through a mathematical field, right? So if I go back here, I'm going to share back the screen. If I add a field now, I have this field now, mathematical calculation. And I could say, so this would be the dimension. But this is something that would be calculated. It's a mathematical field. And then we would put the mathematical formula here. This is where the calculation would be. And I think it's worth it that I show you a bit what that looks like. I'm going to show you the documentation real quick. So I'm going to switch here, so share to this tab. So this is the documentation on doc.tiki.org, and it shows you an example of the mathematical calculation field. So it can go something very simple, like I want to multiply the priority times the severity. This is one sample thing. Or it could be something more advanced. Of course, here you probably want somebody with more mathematical skills to develop these formulas. But it can be done, and it's all done through the web interface. So, and there are a bunch of different ways you can do that. Let me show you the calculation syntax. So here we could see some examples, right? So we could say, we can add a sum, for example. We can subtract, divide, multiply. And so there's dozens of these calculations. And from that, we could basically take any basic data in the Tiki Trackers and combine it, do mathematical calculations to produce something else, and use that something else in the trackers in your reports. So I won't do it here, but this is how you would do it to do the dimensions. Okay, then somebody added for a date. Somebody wanted a field page. Okay, that's a good example. Because Tiki has, I'm going to switch back to this tab. Because Tiki has all these features, you could have a wiki page for that product. So we could say, I want a field, which is the wiki page, and I would just say, here's the wiki page. And then when we work on the database, we add information here. We could add information as a wiki page. Here's a little error message because it's saying that the currency system is not activated. So I would need to activate that to get the currency system to work, but it's just one option away. All right, any other ideas for fields? Or I think we're good. Anyway, you get the idea. So that's you create your database, and then after that you say, okay, let's go and put some data here because we do want some information. And this is probably going to complain because the currency, yeah, it's complaining because the currency field is not activated. So let me just get rid of that one for now. So the currency, no price. Because currencies are actually a quite complex type of feature. So you would end up, you need to configure, various things for the you have to say, what's my default currency, things like that. All right, so, okay, yeah, when I deleted a field, you're probably not very happy with that. Anyway, so this was just a live example, but now let me show you another example of how I make reports in wiki pages. So we're just going to go to a wiki page and we're going to create a new one. And this, we're going to go back to our task, but this is we're going to create I call it like list of tasks, just for fun, just to show you what it looks like when you create reports. So this is the wiki interface. So it's a standard wiki interface that you would expect. For example, you can click here and do things like that. And by the way, for now, this is the Tiki syntax, but we've moved to Markdown. So in the next version, it's Markdown. So the one that's the Tiki 27 that's been released. So we can use Markdown, and because it's become sort of a de facto standard, but we've added some things to Markdown that we're missing. So we call it the Tiki flavored Markdown. So, but now let's say I want to add here a report about the tasks. So how would I do that? Well, I go to my help, and this is sort of some help for the basic syntax of how to do different things in a page. But there's this other cool thing which is called plugin help. When we call it a plugin, in some other software, plugin is like a third-party thing that you need to install. In our case, it means you're plugging something in the page, but it's all built in. So these are all built-in plugins. There's about 200 of them, and there's not any duplication because it's all built in. We don't build two things that do the same thing. It's not like in other systems where they have third-party plugins where you install what you want, but of course there's going to be duplication. There's one of each, but they're all different. So in this case, we're going to look for the one called tracker, and we're looking for the one called tracker list. So this is the one, list, filter, and sort items in a tracker. So we just created, we have a tracker, and now we want to go and create a report. So we'll go to the task one because this one has some data, so it's more interesting. So you see, I said, give me a list of trackers, and it says, okay, which fields you want? Oh, well, okay, I want this one, this one, this one, and this one. And then you have a bunch of options. You want to sort it. You want some pop-ups. You could say, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but just to give you an example, that there's tons and tons of things. So let's do a fun one like this. So do I want a column with the last modification date? So yes. Do I want the creation date? Yes, for example. And then all these options. So you can ignore them if the defaults are pretty sensible. So you can just ignore what you don't understand, and you know that the day that you want something more advanced in the future, it's probably already there. And then and that was even the other stuff. There's even an advanced section. And then I click save, and then it just created it for me. So basically, it says, go to the tracker list, get me tracker number 11, go and get these fields, and show me the created date, show me last modified. I click save, and boom, I have my report. So that is pretty cool because then different people can have different reports. You could create as many as you want, and basically the data is in the database, and every time you visit the page, it will get the latest information. And there's the index, so it doesn't need to hit the database every time. So for performance reasons, there's an index that optimizes things. So that's it. Now other features that are interesting. So we have the file gallery. So this is what you would expect from a file gallery, where you can store files in a sort of a file and folder way. So if I would create a file gallery, it would look like that. But I'm not a big fan of traditional file galleries. The way I prefer of doing it is how I'm going to show you. So if we come back to our products, right? We could want a field which would be with the documentation or a picture. So I'm going to add a field. And in fact, that's going to be a files field. And I'm going to say, this is the pictures. And they're going to be actually stored here. And then when I go back to my database and I create a product, so you see now I can upload the pictures, but it's stored in the database. So that makes it very easy to really know, like everything's like nicely self-contained, versus having your things in a file gallery, and then you have to sort of make folders for each product. No, so you don't do that. You put it in the database, and now it's nice and clean. Okay, the other thing I think is worth showing you would be the general admin panel, because since there's tons of features, let me show you a bit what that looks like. So at a high level, we have this feature admin panel. in which we activate and deactivate what we want. So you see here we have trackers activated, but we did not activate forums. So you basically pick and choose what you want. The general idea is that everything in Tiki should be optional. So if you don't want it, don't turn it on. And if you need it, just turn it on. It's going to be there for you. And we have the basic features, and then we have all these sub features. And then each, especially the big features, will have themselves a bunch of options. So if I go to trackers, trackers itself has many, many, many things, right? So the capacity to import, export, to synchronize with the remote tracker, all these settings. So there's thousands of settings, so I'm not going to go into them now, but it's just to give you an idea that everything is there. And again, with no duplication, because it's the same community collaborating. So we add things, but we don't duplicate. And these are examples of plugins that we could take the data in trackers, for example, and put it in Wikipages. So I showed you one, but there are many. So there's a timeline, for example. There's a whole bunch of things. These are the types that I had showed you before. And we have another concept called system trackers. Those are for trackers that are more, that don't change much, right? Like the exchange rate tracker is like pre-built. So we have those pre-built trackers. And we're actually going to make more of these in the future. All right, so I'm going to stop now and take some questions. Right, okay, so one question is the Tiki Trackers, can they be linked to a 2D barcode reader? It's great that you asked that question. We're actually working on that. That's on our to-do. So I would say that Tiki today has done a great job for everything that's like online. Like as a tool to have everybody collaborating in one database, everything connected, it's doing really well. What it needs to improve is reporting. So tracking data, really good. Reporting, good, but not great. And then connecting to the outside world, that's something that's basic. So we have APIs, we have webhooks, we have some things, but it's not great yet, and we're working on that. And for example, linking to a barcode reader is something we're actually working on in our whole strategy for IoT. So our goal is that an organization that would have all this data on IoT, Internet of Things, that data would make its way into trackers where we can do all the fun stuff. Next question. And while the next question comes up, this is our page that talks about Internet of Things and our roadmap on what we plan doing. And I'm going to share it here in the chat. Okay. Maybe one thing that I could show, which is pretty cool, is a bit related to that, is the signature. So we have a way that you can sign in a wiki page, and we're now working to connect that to trackers. So let's say somebody fills out a form, then they could sign. So that's happening. It's being developed these days. Next question. Okay, so keep on putting questions in the chat. So then I'll take this time to show you a bit more, because now what I showed you a finished product, this task tracker. I showed you how we would build it if we were starting from scratch, but I didn't show you sort of what the middle ground is, right? So the thing in Tiki is that there's always a simple way of doing something, which would be sort of the point and click. So when I showed you, for example, this page, list of tasks, this was very simple. You see here, we have this simple plugin that gives you that. But what if you want a different layout? What if you don't want things like that? Well, that's where you're going to want a layout. So let me show you an example of a layout. That would be like this, view task. So you see here, this is like a template page. But if I go and show you, if I edit this, what we did here is we can put HTML in a page. Of course, here you want like a programmer. So this is more of sort of a low code or a low code context. So here we put some HTML on the page because we want it to have a specific look. And here we're doing things a bit more advanced, right? So we're saying we want the layout to be pretty much the way we want it. So we want to view task. We want to go and get the data from tracker 11. And here, so we have this makes it look the way we want, so that then if I go to my tasks and then I click on a view tasks, it looks like this. So of course it's more difficult to make it look like this, but you don't have to do it. You only do it if if you have the skills and if it's worth it in terms of how many people are going to use the system, things like that. Okay. So I see Pablo in the chat as living. Oh, can I connect a tracker to a local LLM? Okay, thank you for that question. So let me show you what we've been working on. Thank you, Pablo. I haven't seen that question. So we've been working on this. So share this tab instead. So you should see our page related to semantic search. This is brand new. It was just released, and it's a little experimental. And actually, we've worked with Pablo on this. Thank you, Pablo. It was really great to work with you on this. So basically, right now we don't even have any documentation, but here's the code. So basically, a semantic search proof of concept. That's where we are. It's basically to leverage, to permit for Tiki not just to do like traditional search, but also semantic search actually. So here's a source code, and here's all the dependencies, all the libraries we built, or mostly Pablo built, for us to integrate. Pablo, maybe in the chat, you tell me a bit more what else you have in mind that we could share with the group while I answer Edwin's question. How easy is it to import or export data? Okay, so for importing, exporting data, so basically we have a bunch of different tools to import wiki pages, to export wiki pages, to export trackers, and we have a way to have pre-definitions, right? So, well, I think the best is if I just show you a screenshot. So we could have a schema where you connect different fields. I don't know if it's too small. Let me expand here if you can see it a bit bigger. Yeah. So we have a way to define. So let's say, because you're doing importing and exporting, you can have like one system which has not exactly the same fields as the other system. So we have a way to connect fields. But usually the easiest way to import something in Tiki is simply to export. Let me share back my screens. The simplest is just to export the data to CSV, and then then you have an example. So if I show you real quick, so we have our trackers here. So we have our task tracker. So I would just click here and I would say export. And here we have some options, sort of what the delimiter is, all these options. So you set what you want, the way you want to do it, and then you export. And there's a bunch of different options. So I would say we're trying to make it as easy as possible, but sometimes there can be some weirdness with like character encoding and things like that. And then the other thing is if we want to import data, we have a way to just upload, and you pick what the separator is. What I would recommend is if you're uploading data, start with a small data set before you do a big one, just to make sure everything's okay. So thank you, Pablo. So I'll just read it out for everybody. So next step for LLM and Tiki integration will be to have pages built from trackers using examples. For these fields, this is the product description. If anybody's interested in collaborating on that, please contact us. You bet. Okay, any more questions? Okay, then if we have a bit more time, I guess I can show you a bit the permission system, because that's pretty awesome. From the moment you have like a lot of data, a lot of users, you're going to sooner or later run into the challenge of groups and permissions. So let's say I wanted to have a specific group, so I could say this is the group in charge of products. So I would create the group, and then this group can have a description. It can also inherit its permissions from other systems, from other groups. So let's accept all the defaults and create the group product. That's good. And then I could say I also want another group, which would be for the tasks, for example. And there you go. So then here's how you set permissions. So all the features you have in Tiki, you determine which group can do them. So we'll say, okay, these are all the possible groups, okay? For now, but we have some systems with like dozens of groups, or even over 100 sometimes. And here we could say, okay, show me for the wiki. So in the wiki, for example, registered users can view pages and edit pages. And we want them to upload pictures, but let's say they can't remove. To remove, you need to be an admin, for example. To rename, maybe you're okay. So that's how you would determine, and that's for wiki pages. Same thing for file galleries. You have all these different permissions. And then same thing for trackers. Who's allowed to create a tracker, change a tracker, remove a tracker, list a tracker. So it's not just the traditional way of saying, can I add, edit, and view? It's not just that. Because sometimes like you have specific things that are a bit more complicated. Like for example, in the wiki, you want to say who's allowed to view the permissions, view the history. So that's not the same. You don't edit the history, so it's only do you view it or not. So traditional permission systems are too constrained for things like this. So we just have the permissions they're really very dependent on the feature. So there's over 200 permissions, as you see, for all the different features, and not all even the features are activated here. So same thing for calendar, you would have these permissions. Now, those permissions are global in the system, right? So if I just save that, and I just said what I did. But then what you can do is you can have categories. Let's see if I've activated the category feature. So categories, yes, okay. So then you could say, are there any categories in the system? So right now it's activated, but there are none. So you create categories. So you can say, I'll create a category. So for example, it could be well, back to our idea about products. So this is a high-level category for products. But then within products, I could say, I want a category for perishable, or let's say wood. Wood is one category, let's say. Another one could be, what would be, so, sorry, create category. So let's say same level as wood, I would say metal, for example. So then what you can do is you could say, well, anything that's in the metal category is going to have different permissions. And then you could do the same thing. You could say, well, in the metal category, things are different. So that, yeah, normally you're not, the registered people are not allowed to do things. People in the products group. But now that we're in the metal category, the products group can do all these things, for example. So you see it as a bit of a different color. So that would be permissions per category. And then you can override that. So if I just go to an individual wiki page here, see permissions, I could say, I don't care what happens globally. I don't care what happens in a category. I want specific permissions for this page. So we're assigning it to the object. And then I could change it and say, for this object, here's something that's different. So with that, you pretty much do whatever you need. Okay, time for more questions. So maybe because we're reaching the end, so what I'd like to conclude with is that Tiki is a very powerful tool for building databases, but not just databases, also communities and getting people to collaborate. It is open source, so it really is, you know, people that get to participate, people that get involved. You know, the software is whatever people that get involved make it, right? So, and it's a collaborative community, so there's developers, there's designers, there's people who write documentation, people writing specifications, so all types of different skill sets are getting together to build an awesome open source software, which is over 20 years old and just getting better all the time. Any last questions?
Hey, Mark, can you talk a bit about you know, the community, the program that you have in Africa that's related to this?
Sure. Thanks for the question. So we have, as a community, so open source communities basically evolved that people all over the world started using Tiki 20 years ago. And people, we have some people in Japan, some in England, some in France, some in Czech Republic. And it actually, Tiki started in South America, in Argentina to be specific. So what happens is that the community is very international, and there's all kinds of people that are working on it. And that's also why it's translated in many languages. But what happened is a few years ago, we realized that we didn't have enough developers. We needed more people to work on Tiki. And of course, there's the open source part, but there's also the business part where we're offering professional services to organizations, and we need people to be able to offer those professional services. And typically what will happen is a company is using Tiki and they're missing a feature and they want to pay someone to build that feature. And it would be really sad to say, sorry, we don't have time, because that would be one more feature that the whole community would benefit from. So we decided to try to hire more people, and then we thought about it, we did some research, and we started hiring some developers in Africa. So now over half of our developers are actually in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and they're working on Tiki, and they're active participants of the community. And they have, interestingly, not just a developer skill set. A lot of them are also graphic designers, and some of them are being trained up to be sysadmins as well. And basically, it's a way for them to learn through real software. Here's my concern sometimes with people will get like sort of the opportunity to work somewhere, but they're not going to work on the real software. They're going to be doing things that are maybe less risky or less important. But in an open source project, everybody's working on, especially in our case, everybody's working on the same code base. So everybody's improving what everybody else is doing. And we have a whole process of mentoring and coaching. And in general, unless like the people with the most experience, like they can commit directly, but most of the time our process is that every merge request is reviewed by someone else. So that improves quality, and it gives the opportunity to have some feedback. So this gives us a chance to have a lot of contributions from our developers in DR Congo, and also to coach them on how to get better at participating to an open source project. And it's not just in Tiki, because we as an organization, we also use a bunch of software in other projects. We almost always use open source. There's a tiny few exceptions, but we even if it's more complicated, more expensive, we use open source. And then when we run into problems, well, we're not just reporting bugs. We also will propose a merge request, and the projects appreciate that. So it's really cool to have a lot of developers that are working in that way. Any questions?
There are a couple in the chat. Are you able to? I'm happy to read them if you'd like.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure I read them before, all the questions. So what requirements does it need? Computing resources. So that's a question from Edwin. Thank you. Well, it's a standard. Well, I'll ask the second question as well. So what requirements does it need? Computing resources, and what language is it coded in? So Tiki is coded in PHP. It's a standard PHP MariaDB web application. So it needs just any old web server. So really a small web server with like 2 gigs of RAM, some disk space will be sufficient to run Tiki on. And Yeah, it's just standard hosting, basically. It's quite standard. PHP MariaDB. It's designed really for shared hosting. So if you have shared hosting, you're fine, and if you have something better than shared hosting, then you're extra fine.
So is it, if people want to work on a project just to get started with it, is there sort of a way to do it without paying any fees or anything?
Well, they would need to install it on their machine, right? Like so, they can just install it locally. So since it's a PHP application, there are tools like that you can install PHP on your computer. You just run it on your computer. You don't need to pay anybody. Just poke around, play with it. There's also demo sites. So if you go to demo.tiki.org, you can get access to the demos and you can just play there. The thing with the demos though is they get refreshed, I think, once a week. So whatever you do once a week, it's going to be gone. But at least you can play with it and you don't need to install anything. And it'll give you a feeling of the application. And you have different versions of the software. You can have version 24, 27. This is, I think, something I didn't mention, I should mention. So the way it works in Tiki is that every 8 months, there's a new version, right? So at 25, 26, 27. Now, every third version is what we call long-term support, and that's supported for 5 years. So basically, every 2 years, there's a new version. That version is supported for 5 years. So what's cool is that you can either say, I want new features all the time, and you upgrade every 8 months, which some people do. But you can also say, no, it has enough features, it has everything I want. I just want stability, and I want my bug fixes, and I want my security fixes. Then you should pick a long-term support version, set that up, and then you're good for many years. So I'm just going to share the link for the demo here in the chat. Oh, somebody already had that. Thank you.
And Marc, do you also want to share, if it's public, like what companies are using these products?
So that gets a bit tricky because a lot of them are sort of big corporates, and they don't really want us to share. But I can tell you the type of organization. So because it's a generic tool, it's a bit any type of organization. So we have some in the healthcare system, some in the sort of the hotels system. But basically, the key place, like where Tiki is used a lot, is in the enterprise behind the firewall. So anybody who wants to control their data, they don't want to put their data on a SaaS platform. They don't want the fees, they don't want the problems, and they just want to control their data, but they want it hosted locally, but they also want it open source. So often behind the firewall, on-prem, and things that the IT department doesn't necessarily do well. Like let's say the IT department in a big organization, they're going to supply like the email system, the networks. But if there's a specific need for one department, sometimes it's difficult for them to cater to that. And Tiki there is really good because it does a bit of everything, and there's and it's open source. And then so that's one type. The other type is a lot of nonprofits that are using it because it's open source. Sometimes it's for public-facing websites, but often it's for more the collaborative back-end tools. And that's where Tiki's a bit of a weird animal, is that most tools are like, okay, it's for websites, or it's for intranets, or it's for this, or it's for databases. But Tiki is like a bit of everything. So it's difficult to categorize it. And actually, one of we have a backronym for Tiki. So an acronym is, you know what an acronym is, right? But a backronym is an acronym that was selected after. So the name Tiki was picked originally for a long time ago, just for the funny reason is that somebody like the author developed a wiki, but people didn't know what wikis were back then. So he said, here's your wiki. And they called it Tiki. They got mixed up. So then when he released it as open source, he called it Tiki Wiki. So it stayed like that. But when we're talking about Tiki today, we talk about a tightly integrated knowledge infrastructure. So TIKI, tightly integrated knowledge infrastructure. And it does a bit of everything, as I showed you in the event panel. So it's useful for just about any type of organization.
Would you say that Tiki, because it's an on-premises, provides greater security for these organizations, that maybe they're less likely to experience these cyber attacks that we see?
Right. Okay. So that's a good question. So, in fact, because Tiki is used online a lot, it actually is more robust. So what happens if behind the firewall, like on-prem things, they're less attacked because it does happen, but often what happens in on-prem is because your firewall protects you, some applications are not kept up to date because it's less likely to be attacked. It happens sometimes. Somebody will some attackers will breach the firewall, and once they breach the firewall, they start attacking the applications within. So, but when your application is online all the time, you get attacked every day. Like if our Tiki sites, for example, we get attacked every day. It's nonstop. So because Tiki is a web application, which is on the open web, it's been attacked for 2 decades. So we had to become really good at mitigating against that. For example, by default, if somebody tries a brute force attack, for I don't know, for 20 years now, if someone tries a brute force attack on Tiki, it locks itself up. Like it says, no more, you can't. There's all kinds of mechanisms to improve security because that's how it is on the open web. There's so many attacks. Now, what's cool is that this protection comes with Tiki. So even when we put it behind the firewall, we still have those protections. We don't turn them off. They're there. So if there's a breach of the firewall and Tiki is up to date, it's actually going to be pretty safe. Versus other applications that they feel, oh, we're behind the firewall, we won't get attacked. But the day they do get attacked, they're in trouble. So I think that today, even behind the firewall, you should consider that you're like on the open web. You should always have everything very secure and have it secure by default because especially big companies, there's a lot of users. So just takes one breach and then it's a big problem.
There's another question from Edwin, which is, can it be placed on cloud, private/public cloud? Or are there any organizations doing that?
Well, it can be anywhere. It's a web app. It's a standard web application. So any tool, any hosting provider that they just need to supply PHP and MySQL or MariaDB, and you can install Tiki on that. If you want to simplify things, I can show you how our default install script. So let's say you have a virtual machine. So the simplest is just to get a virtual, if you don't want to go in shared hosting, because if you go in shared hosting, then you can go in the installer and Tiki is almost always there. So you can get it there. Let's say you have your own server and you want to run a virtual machine. What you can do is follow our instructions on that. So let me show you real quick. So this is the WikiSuite tool. So WikiSuite, it goes around Tiki, right? It's a federation of software components. I'll show you real quick which they are. So in WikiSuite, there's virtualmin, which is the admin panel, it's the server part. Then there's Tiki, the Sift webmail I showed you before, and then there's a bunch of more specialized tools like Manticore Search. That's when you have a lot of volume and you need like a really advanced search. OpenFire is the XMPP server, so that would be for chatting and real-time collaboration. SyncThing would be for syncing files and to do backups, and then some other specialized tools. Mesh Central is to take control of other computers. So let's say you're working from home and your computer is at your office. You can connect to your computer and run it. And this is for the phone system, and this is for digital signage. This is at a high level what WikiSuite does. But WikiSuite has an installer, so you can install directly from this script here. This is the script. You run this, and it's going to take a fresh virtual machine, Debian or Ubuntu, and it's going to install WikiSuite. And once it's installed WikiSuite, then you have a one-click installer for Tiki, and it's all documented there. And then the other thing, if you have specific people that are interested, have questions, we have a community chat room that I'm going to. Can someone share the link of the chat room in the chat?
What's the URL? Can you read it?
Yeah. Okay. Here, I'm gonna copy paste it here. So we're on Gitter. So this is the chat room for. It's a matrix powered chat room that the community hangs out. So you can just ask questions there on how to do things. But yeah, to your answer, Edwin, can you be placed on the cloud, private, public? So yes, you could do any place you want. You just need to install it yourself. Now there is one. So we do have one service that's new that's specialized Tiki hosting, but it's not free. So you need to pay for hosting. There's also tikihosting.com. So you can install it locally. You can install it anywhere. But if you want someone to host it for you and you have funds, you could also go to tikihosting.com and get it there. And that's my team that offers this. So here we go. So we do not do a free hosting, and the reason is that like the software is free, but hosting costs resources. It costs electricity, it costs bandwidth. So we're not in a position to offer these free things, because the way to monetize that would be other business models that we're not into. Like, we're not into advertising, we're not into selling people's data. So if we do free hosting and we have tens of thousands of clients, it's just going to be a perpetual drag financially, and eventually it'll be shut down. I've seen a lot of like free hosted wikis in the past, and a lot of them have shut down. So so that's why, like, the hosting part, you need to either host it locally or host it somewhere. But if you're probably going to need to pay. You need to pay for a domain name, you need to pay for disk space and CPU time.
Do you collaborate or work with like any universities or students?
Well, we've done some projects with universities before, yes. So universities, basically, they needed Tiki for a specific tool, and they would just run it and have a wiki and use trackers. Yeah, it's happened before. Students, yeah. Sometimes, well, I don't know if it was university students, but I've seen some classrooms, some teachers using Tiki to manage classrooms. Yes, I've seen that before.
Okay. So I don't see any more questions in the chat. So Marc, thank you so much for presenting. It was very, very informative. We have the links in the chat, and the video will be available in a couple of days. Thank you so much, Marc.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for showing up, and stay safe.
Bye.